And in the top right, you can see the real-time time. This is sped up double, but the time in the corner. So here at 17 seconds, she's got a majority of the arch. And she's averaging 1 to 1.5 minutes. And, I'm averaging under 1 minute routinely.
Hello everyone, thank you for joining us today. My name is Jenny and I'm a part of the education team at Medit. Nice to meet you everyone. And today we have Dr. Matt Nejad. Thank you for being here, doctor.
My pleasure. I'm excited to share some of these cool new updates from the latest changes to Medit Scan and Medit Link in this webinar.
Hmm. So it's kind of an official question for every KOL. So is there any new plan for this year?
Any new plans for my clinic and everything like that?
Yeah, because it's 2024, first time seeing you. So
Yeah, so our goals this year, we set some nice growth targets. We had a really good last year, but I did a lot of traveling. So I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on staying in the practice, getting more time for myself for exercise, wellness, and practicing instead of traveling because traveling was getting really hard. So I'm going to try to stay
uh,
for a little bit longer this year.
hmm. So you want to take care of yourself more than like focusing on traveling and working, right?
Yeah, totally. I got a new gym and all that cool stuff at home, so I'm
Cool.
able to work out more. I got the Peloton. I got this thing called the Tonal, which is really awesome. It's like a home exercise gym with a lot of different cool things on it. So it's been really nice start so far.
I just had a plan, but I couldn't really exercise yet.
The key is to remove all the excuses or the different things that get in the way. And for me, the excuse I always had was I'm too tired after I get home to change, go to the
Right.
gym, spend all that time. So once it's here and I'm paying for it and there's no excuse, it's been really easy. I'm probably going to do it after this webinar again too.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay, so it was very cool to hear about your plan. So
great.
let's talk about today's topic. So
Perfect.
it's about Medit Scan for clinics and Medit Link.
Yeah, I'm going to be sharing a combination of updates, my settings, some of the cool new features that are put in there. I had a lot of things that have been implemented, or I should say a few things that have been implemented were things I really wished for and expressed, that would be nice. And I was really happy to see it. And I think it was such a big change for both
Mm,
Medit Scan and Medit Link. The usability, the everything just got so good. So I'm really excited to share that for anyone who hasn't seen it and go over like my settings and workflow.
mm. Okay, so is there any contents that you would like to especially emphasize in your lecture for today?
The emphasis will be more on Medit Scan for clinics. Medit Link will be a little bit more brief, but in Medit Scan for clinics, I'm going to share pretty much all the different settings, including my workflow and some demonstrations.
Mm. Okay, so we'll have a special attention in that part.
Okay,
So let's get it started.
sounds good. So as we mentioned in this webinar, I'm going to be sharing Medit Link and Medit Scan for clinics, including settings, tips, and new features. That's a typo. Sorry about that. I'm really excited because from the beginning, I've always thought that Medit has amazing technology, really high quality, and I saw the possibility and the potential for things to get even more improved, and I saw a lot of room for small changes to have big impacts. And so I always do my best to express those things, and some of those features have made it. And I think that the response has been very positive. And I also think that from my own perspective, it's made such a huge difference into how efficient I can use the software, how easy it is for my staff to learn and implement. And I'm really big on trying to have a team that can understand this type of technology because it's so hard to do everything yourself. And it's also hard for team to use technology. So the easier things become and the more streamlined these workflows become, the better it is for all of us. So we're going to start with Medit Link. And from the beginning, when I was using Medit Link, one of the things that never made sense to me was why we couldn't have patient data lumped under the patient. So that was one of my big requests. And I expressed that over several different discussions that organizing it so that you can select the patient and see all their data would be a much more efficient way and easier way. And so I was really happy to see that. So for example, we look at this demonstration case, you can see all the different scans for that patient. You can sort that way. You can also do cool things where if you want to look at 2 or 3 different patients, you can use this box up here to just pick, 2 or 3 cases that you're going to have to review or go over today and limit it to that so you can see a few different patients. But I always thought all patient data should be accessible from like within a folder for that patient. And even more so in the future, I'm excited to say that I think there's going to be further organization like this where you can access splints or clinic CAD or other projects that you've done with the patient using other apps are going to be accessible through here. So think of this as the first version with more organization and efficiency to come. This was a huge thing for me, my staff. We had so many times where we created the same patient several times over and over because they would just type in the patient name and not assign a scan to it. This way, it's easier to see everything. We can avoid the mistake of picking the wrong scan to duplicate or clone for different procedures. That got us into trouble a few times. So this was a huge change. I really love that. Now, a couple settings I want to go over too. So over here in the top right, you have your settings gear icon. And if you select that, there's a few different settings I want to go over. So under general, this pre-op for maxilla, pre-op for mandible and face scan, this setting will always add the pre-op for maxilla, mandible, and face scan. And while that sounds like it's useful for me, I think a better default is to just have, upper, lower, and bite, and then add these things using the different stages. So when you open the scan, you can do that. So I'm going to show you what my default is, which is just the basics. And I'd rather add it in later because I've had numerous times where we're not going to do a pre-op, where we're just doing diagnostic scan and we have to end up cleaning things up later. So I'd always rather start with the baseline. So that's one setting I have on there. You can also see the advanced rendering is on, and I have the light all the way up to the right, but that's actually too much. About halfway is going to be the sweet spot. I was experimenting with different things. If you go all the way, your scan's going to look too bright and washed out. Somewhere in the middle is going to be the sweet spot. And if you're using a Mac, I like to follow Windows mouse controls. The reason being because we have Macs and PCs in the office, so it gets really confusing how the buttons will change between them. I'm always kind of struggling to like get into the mindset of this or that. So it ends up being much more convenient for me to kind of have the same across both. Then under export options, we got a couple cool things. Okay, so first of all, by default, when you're exporting things, the default is the case creation date, not the scan date. So you have case creation date and patient name, but I like to have patient name and scan date so that I can always be sure it's based on the procedure date that it was done. Basically, the date that we scanned it is going to definitely be the date that the information was acquired versus the case creation date. And the other thing I like to do is put these things into a Dropbox folder, or at least change where you're saving these things, because I've tried everything in the world. And if I don't do something like this, my staff will always end up putting it on the desktop. And before you know, you're going to have a desktop that looks like this with a million scans and it's cluttered. It slows down your computer and everything. So what I do instead is I put it onto a folder, Medit exports or intraoral scans, or whatever you want to name it. And I like to use a Dropbox folder, and I can make a shortcut to it on my computer. So right now what we're using is a folder called intraoral scans. It covers us with any other scans we need. Like for example, we do iTero scans sometimes just because of Invisalign, and that way we can export here. And what's nice is sometimes we need to export it and then we're telling someone to 3D print something and they can do it from the back. Or if we're going to do design with a milled restoration, we can access it. So every computer will have access to it. So they all have this shortcut on there. So it makes things a lot more smooth. That's basically the extent of the features for Medit Link that I think that you need to know. Now we're going to go into Medit Scan for clinics. We're going to cover some of my settings, new features, and workflow for like a routine case, the way I do it, which might be different than how you're using it. So first, let's talk about how I set the default. I already said I don't like that check mark where it includes the pre-op and everything. So this is how you set your default any way you want it. So what's really cool about this software for Medit is you can customize it so much. And at first you don't need to do that, but as you use it more and more, it makes a lot of sense to optimize these. So when you're creating a case and you open it, the first thing that happens is you get to the form where you can fill out what it is. Say we're doing number 8 and 9 as crowns or veneers. Let's do veneers, pick our material. I'll pick Lissy. Shade, I don't usually specify. Save that. Now, when I open to scan this, whatever, if you had that check mark set, you would have the pre-op for the maxilla and everything load. But if you don't, you have whatever stages you've set as default. So you see here, I have upper, lower, and bite. You can set it as the default. But if you want to drag any of these other ones, you can put any of these on by pressing the plus sign at any time. And if you want them to be part of your default, you can just save them as your default. For me, it's always been easier to just do it this way and then tell my staff I want a pre-op for the upper or the lower or whatever. That way we can be clear and minimize these types of situation. So that's my default and that's what I want. I don't really want anything else added to it. And because sometimes we're doing bleaching tray scans, sometimes we're doing diagnostic scans, and we don't need a pre-op for those types of things. Now within Medit Scan for clinics, you also have a gear icon down here in the bottom left corner. So you want to click on that and there's so many different options. Okay, so we're going to go through some of them. A lot of these are default, but depending on what your settings were before upgrading and if any staff has been tinkering with it, you want to go through these. So within the program preferences, I like to leave the show scanning information on. I like to leave the info box on just in case I can learn something over time. I don't like the simple UI. I like to have more controls and options and so on. You can definitely remove practice mode. And let's go back to that. Then for adjust color texture, right around the middle and advanced rendering on. And then whatever color you like, I actually use green for my reliability map color scheme. This was just on my laptop and it was showing that. Then under the scanning assistance tab or menu here, I want to make sure that I have Smart Scan Guide on. Personally, smart arrows off, because as useful as they can be, I delegate a lot to my staff and I find they go chasing them too much in areas that don't matter, like interproximal embrasures of teeth that we aren't treating. I'm okay with getting the information that she's collecting, my assistant's collecting without these, and it ends up making the file so much bigger. So it's cool to have to check. And I think if you see later in one of the stages where we're reviewing our preps, it's going to pop in and show us areas where we need to potentially touch up, but I don't want it on by default. Okay. Everything else is on here. Now under scanning performance, I do want, this is a new option, prevent scan data misalignment. I want that on. Extend dynamic range, which makes it easier to capture difficult areas. I don't like global soft tissue filtering. Sometimes it interferes with me trying to catch soft tissue information like the palate. I use the Smart Scan filter for that. And then you do want active noise filtering on and prevent occlusion misalignment beta on as well. Now moving into the post-processing. So set file size automatically, it's the beta, I have that turned on. My optimize occlusion alignment is in the middle. And then this new feature down here, high resolution data processing, where it'll automatically apply high resolution data processing to prepared teeth. And you can choose if you want it to process SD data in high resolution. Standard definition data can be processed at the in the processing stage and optimization stages if you want, but I have it set to HT scan data only. If you do everything as high definition, your files are going to get big, the uploads are going to take longer, opening things is going to get longer. Remember that high definition doesn't necessarily mean more precise. I have a picture here that kind of shows. So between standard definition and high definition, the major difference you're going to see is detail and texture. And where that really matters is for your margin lines, your finish lines. It'll help interpret the sulcus and the margin more efficiently. So I'm not trying to use high definition data everywhere, but definitely on the preps. And that new feature makes it so that it automatically does that on prep data. I am used to setting high definition myself for the margins, but now it's going to do that itself. Okay, in the scanner area, I want the anti-fogging fan mode on high performance. The sound doesn't really bother me that much. We're not scanning for that long. The other option, silent. My scanning experience, I think by default it's on fast and furious, but I'm using automatic. And these are really cool here. These scan button actions, I'm using these a lot now, and I wasn't using them at first. So I'm going to demonstrate those, but basically, you have these options and you can select what each one does for double click, triple click, and long click. So for double click, I have move to the next stage. Triple click, this is the blue button on the Medit i700 or 500. And so if you triple click, I can change from standard definition to high definition. With some of these new updates, I might replace that one because it's going to do it automatically with preparation data. So I might be able to put this for either optimized data or maybe even changing my filtering for soft tissue filtering, the smart tissue filtering. So, but for now, I'm still using the standard definition, high definition, and then long click you can set to run stage navigator. So I can show you all of these. So for double click, what happens if I double click this blue button here, you'll notice on the top where we have our stage manager, it's going to just, this is all being done by me double clicking on the blue button. I can kind of go through the different stages without having to touch anything. Super useful, especially going from one bite to the next. We still need a little bit of input from the mouse here and there, but a lot of what we do can be handled this way, okay? Now, change scan resolution. So if you triple click on this blue button without having, again, to touch the mouse or anything, we can toggle high definition on, triple click it again, high definition off. You can program it to something else if you'd like. I've been using that, but more and more, I think I'm going to replace that because of the operation data automatically now. And then a really cool one is the long click stage navigator. So when you long click and hold this button, what you have happen is the stage navigator comes up. So you can jump back to any step you want. It also has some of the useful tools at the bottom accessible. The context of these tools changes based on what you're on. So right now I'm on the pre-op maxillary scan, so it's relevant to that. But if you were not on there, you would have some different options that appear. Now we get to scan data analysis, okay? So personally, the type of dentistry I do, biomedic dentistry, I'm dealing with minimal preparation across the board. So I had to really try to optimize these settings for me. And this is what's been working really well so far for me. So I have enable smart scan review stage on by default because I really, really like this. This new feature, the smart scan review stage, I'm going to show you just a little bit later, but very useful way to avoid being under reduced or having problems with your data. And that's so important to avoid having a patient come back for an unnecessary follow-up. Then I want to have align with occlusal plane when entering the smart scan review stage. That's the first step of the smart scan review. I don't need check tooth reduction depth because I'm going to use check distance to the antagonist. So I don't really need the software to check my preparation depth because also it's basing it on the pre-op, and a lot of times we're trying to improve the situation from the pre-op. So it might not be that I'm trying to reduce 100% according to what the pre-op was, right? I might be adding a little more anatomy, cuss tips, where there's room, if it's out of occlusion, et cetera. So I want to use check distance to the antagonist. I want to turn off check distance to adjacent because it's not a very useful feature for me to be having the software interpret my how close I am to the adjacent tooth. I do minimal separation on a lot of cases, but it's never been something that has been a problem for me, and I don't need to try to interpret that. But if it is for you, you can turn it on. And then I have these distances. These are dialed in for the type of dentistry I do, which is biomimetic, minimally invasive dentistry. So I'm not using this distance to the adjacent, but I have it set at 0.5. I'm using 1 millimeter distance to the antagonist. Sometimes I go higher, like 1.5, just to leave a little bit of margin of error, because what happens is when you're reviewing, if you're under 1 millimeter, it'll tell you. I think if you want it to have a little bit of extra room for error, you go with 1.5, and hopefully that means you won't have to re-prep areas as often. So that's there. And then you can, if you're using the tooth reduction depth, which I'm not, you can have it either be uniform, or you can specify, like I like my crowns with 0.5 millimeter labial reduction, or 1.5, and so on. But again, I'm not using that. Okay, so let's look at a demonstration of this smart scan review. Okay, so here I have the icon right up here. This is the icon for smart scan review. This has become a very important part of my workflow to make sure that we're checking for data that is going to be acceptable and minimize problems. So let's look at how that goes. When you click on it, first it optimizes the mandibular, maxillary, and occlusal data. So you got to give it some time depending on how large your scans were. That could take, up to 30 seconds or so. It also depends on your computer. I got really fast computer. So usually wait for that just a little bit. Now the first step is it's going to automatically align with the occlusal plane. So here we already have that. And then if you want to modify that, you can. Otherwise, you can press next. Now it's going to number the teeth using AI automatically. It's going to determine which one's the prepared tooth, and it's going to select it. And you can modify that selection if it's not correct. Like you can kind of see it missed a little right there on the mesial. So I'm just going to kind of brush over and add that to that. So this is my onlay preparation for number 18, and number 19 is my adjacent, which is much more important for analyzing your space to the adjacent. But like I said, my major goal is to be comparing to the antagonist. So now we press next. Give it some time, and it's going to do some analysis, and it's going to show us 3 or 4 different pieces of information. Okay, so it's going to show us if we have insufficient data acquisition anywhere, if we have layered data meaning you have overlapping meshes, and that can create a problem. So when we look here, we see a few different things. So it said I have insufficient data, which or layered data, I should say, and that's the yellow area. So you can see it's not in important areas. It's in the right there in the mesial of that box, and also in the cervical area. So there's this button you can push right here to remove layered data, and it should take care of that. If you need to scan over because it's more significant, you definitely could, but it's not on my margins. It's not in an area I'm concerned about. I don't have any insufficient reduction based on my 1 millimeter setting. You see that blue arrow on the mesial of number 19? That's the smart arrows I was talking about. I don't need information on the mesial side of number 19. So that's what it's referring to with my insufficient data acquisition. I can turn that off, and then I would have, just the layered data that we took care of by pushing that button. So if you did have an under-reduced area, it would show you that, and then you can adjust your prep and go back. And imagine with the type of dentistry I do, if you use like rubber dam, now what I'm trying to do is scan this in the rubber dam, check that right there, okay? And then make my modifications before taking rubber dam off, and then I can do a final check. But that way I minimize the situation where I have to either put rubber dam back on or try to finish the procedure without it. So I've gotten much more predictable on that, and that's pretty much as bad as it can be when you're looking at a second molar. That's a very common situation where even if I've reduced 1.5 millimeters, sometimes I end up under reduced in some areas because that interference, the minute you remove an interference on a second molar, oftentimes you have repositioning and less space than you had prepped. So really useful way to minimize those things. Now let's look at the another way to verify that. So I had 1 millimeter as my setting, if you remember. So it's checking for 1 millimeter. Another really cool tool, this has been around, but I'm just using this to double check things, is Medit Measure. So right inside Medit Scan for Clinics, you can highlight this area and let it merge. Depending on how big of an area you pick, it's going to take some time. And again, the speed of your computer will make a difference. Once it's merged this data, you can make some cuts. So I'm going to make 2 or 3 different cuts in here, and I can use it to evaluate how much clearance I have and just verify that it's doing its job. So far, it's been very accurate, the Smart Scan review. So right now I'm just trying to get the scan off, but the cross-section lines on. So you can see we have these cross sections, and then you can measure by 1 or 2 points. I think one is probably faster. So that means you would be able to pick the area on one tooth, and it would automatically show you the space. So look right here, 1.3. Right over there, 1.17. Right around here, 1.098, 1.085. So I just barely hit that 1 millimeter setting. And that's what's cool with that Smart Scan review. It's basically doing this for you, and it would highlight the areas that you need to prep or that you didn't have your setting. And so that's much faster than doing this, and it's been very reliable. Okay, now I'm going to show you, this would be the final section of this webinar. I'm going to show you the workflow that I'm using for a routine final inlay or onlay restoration. So first of all, I'm really big on delegating what I can. You know, once I sit down and I start working, I'm not delegating any of the dentistry. I'm not delegating the provisional, but scanning is one of the things that I would love to be able to train my staff to do. So what you're going to see here is a very quick real-time scan. Well, actually it's sped up, but the time in the corner is going to show you how long the assistant spent doing this. And one of the best things that happen with the Medit Scan for Clinics, it's just the performance. It's easier to scan. It's harder to fall off track. When you start and stop, it's faster. It went from being a little bit frustrating for my assistant to do to her constantly saying how much faster and more efficient it is. So it was such a huge update and such a huge change to how even an assistant perceives scanning. And that's made it so much better. So let's watch how she does this. So first she's getting the pre-op, and in the top right, you can see the real-time time. This is sped up double, but the time in the corner. So here at 17 seconds, she's got a majority of the arch, and she's averaging 1 to 1.5 minutes. And, you know, I'm averaging under 1 minute routinely with high quality scans, like having caught everything that we're trying to get, including like distals of the second molars and everything like that. So here we go. She has 1 minute and about 10 seconds. Okay. Now, on the upper, she's going to take just a little bit longer, but I still think it's pretty impressive. I tell her I want the whole palette. Having palette data is just another useful thing, especially on bigger cases when I want to have references for alignment and more data to be able to line up scans. So my thought is have her do it all the time so that she gets better and better at it rather than doing it, you know, once a week. So we always try to get the full palette. And because of that, the scan ends up taking her, you know, just about 1.5 minutes, I think, if I remember. But that's still pretty amazing. Between upper, lower, and bites, she's routinely done under 5 minutes. And, you know, depending on the appointment, that can be combined with other steps, not numbing if you're trying to capture the bite correctly. Now we lock everything. So this is now going to be for when I want to scan the prep. So we lock everything. Now there's this new single tooth selection tool down there. So you saw I can like unselect one tooth. And then I used to just unlock a little bit of tissue, but if you can imagine rubber dam going on and a clamp and cord and stuff like that, what I found is it's better to pretty much unlock that whole little section. And then you can scan right over that area without even deleting anything. With the pre-op, when you move into the final scan, it can automatically detect the change on the prep. You can scan right over it. Before that, we were always cutting out the area that we were going to scan over and trying to guess where it would be. But what I found is if you unlock enough data, including the soft tissue around there, so that you minimize layered data, you can just do it all just like that. And that single tooth selection is really helpful in a lot of cases when you're dealing with a few different teeth or a few different areas. So I think that is a wrap on the different features and settings and workflows that I'm using. I'm actually really excited to also announce that I'm going to be having a course that covers things like this and also how to use this data for 3D printing and so on. So we're going to be covering Medit splints, Medit design with Clinic CAD, how to do all sorts of different things in the 3D printing world with digital dentistry. It's going to be a 2-day course at Sprint Ray headquarters in Los Angeles, more or less May or June. The date's still being finalized, but if you're interested in this course and you want to join the waitlist to get updates, scan this QR code and we're going to try to put that in the description of the video as well if you want to click on it. But it'll be a great course for those trying to get more efficient and do more with digital dentistry and 3D printing. And of course, make sure you check out my YouTube. I have a lot of information on there, including videos, demonstrations, clinical procedures, and all that stuff. It's at Biomimetic Dentistry, and I hope to stay connected with you. I hope this was a useful webinar for you. I think it was one of the things that really helped my staff in training, and I hope that you can use this information to optimize the settings, make things run smoother, and train your staff on it. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing all your tips with us, Doctor.
Well, my pleasure. I hope everyone found it useful because for me, it's such a important topic. It's like the foundation for digital stuff and getting better with it's just so important and delegating it to your staff also is very important to me.
For some of the Medit users who have difficulties in with the updated features of Scan for Clinics, they might have got the idea.
Good.
Mm.
I'm glad.
Okay, so let's move on to Q&A session.
Okay.
So we have 3 questions in total. So
Cool.
I'll start with the first question.
Okay.
So question number 1, do you have a preference of scanning position according to upper and lower scans?
Scanning position. Like, I wonder if they mean like basically where I'm positioned myself.
With
Yeah.
your
So I sit.
chair.
Yeah, I sit. So almost everything I do is positioned between 9 and 12 o'clock because of how my operatory is set up.
Mm.
And that works really great for me actually because the monitor that has the Medit on it, the software on it is at 12 o'clock behind me. So I basically can sit at around 9 o'clock. The patient's head will be like right here. And I can be looking at this and just looking right
Oh.
at my shoulder and seeing. I actually thought having the monitor in front of me would be good, but I like this. It gives me a good position where I'm almost facing the patient at 9 o'clock, just kind of looking at them. And then I go to 12 o'clock sometimes when I'm dealing with, let's see, top left. If I patient turns their head and I sit at 12 o'clock, I can look right down at the area I'm scanning. So 9 to 12 is my preference with the monitor behind me. And I actually tried a couple of times to scan with the monitor in front of me, but I actually found it more natural for me to be kind of looking at the patient's head and the monitor in a more straight trajectory as opposed to monitors on this side and the patient's head's on this side. So it works out really nicely. Of course, it's all preference, but I think 9 to 12, even my assistant does it pretty much the same. She does it on her side. Actually, no, she comes around to my side when she scans. Anytime she can, she comes to my side and does the same thing. And she stands so she can have the same positions.
Mm. Okay, thank you. So question number 2, is there any specific case that you take conventional impression instead of digital scanning?
Yes and no. So, okay, so let me tell you the story. I started digital scanning 2015 or so. No, 2014 or 15. At the time, I was just doing diagnostic scans, never final restorations. I didn't find it to be precise enough. And as I started to get more and more comfortable with it, and I saw that the scanning technology was changing, and basically once I started using the Medit i700, I started doing both a digital scan and an impression to compare the accuracy just so I have a backup. I didn't want to be in trouble. And what I started finding is that the digital scan for single posteriors and for routine inlays, onlays, crowns was actually a little bit more precise. And if you read the literature, it's actually not really showing anything that says it's way more accurate, but just my experience was things fit a little bit better. The margins were cleaner. So I started using it for all that. And then you would think, so now I don't take an impression for those cases. I just do my scan and I don't need a backup because I have the confidence in it. But now you would think I do everything with digital scan. But what actually happens is when I'm doing a full mouth case or a large case, I also, the type of ceramic I like to do is hand layered ceramic feldspathic. And when you try to use digital, you still need to end up having a refractory die. And by the time you duplicate it and do that, there's a lot of these workflows to try to do this. But so far, I haven't been able to get the same precision. So what I do on those cases is I take a regular impression, but I still take a digital scan. My digital scan is my backup. And it's also, it has some of those things I just showed you with like the measuring tool and stuff. Imagine you're doing a full mouth case. I still check those things. I'm still checking for a reduction. I'm still checking that I have enough reduction for my veneers. In fact, I take my pre-op, not my pre-op, I take my design or my wax up and I import it in as additional data so that I can use it to verify I have enough reduction space to achieve the design I want. And then I still have the scan as a backup. And sometimes it ends up being my primary for those cases, even though it's harder to work with in the feldspathic world. Sometimes I need to if it's more accurate or if it's more precise. But the one thing I would say that I still think we need a little bit of improvement on scanning is when you're doing veneer preps like I do, and there's very minimal separation to the neighboring tooth. Like I do 0.2 separation. When it's that close, even the scanner has a little bit of a hard time picking it up, but even if it picks it up, the printer has a hard time printing it. And long story short, when you have very minimal separation, it becomes hard to get precision in certain areas like interproximally. And so because of that, that is why in bigger cases and cases that I do veneers with minimal separation, I do both. I don't pick PVS over scanning, but I do make my final restoration from the PVS. And one of the cool things we do is we scan that impression right after we finish it, just so that we have another backup in case even that rips. So digital has become a large part of everything I do, but there's still room for a little bit of both, which is like digital and analog. And I think that's important because you got to do what works best for the situation. I think when we look forward, we're going to see digital continue to excel and get better and better and better. It's, it's not the best it's going to be. It's going to get better. But for now, I still do rely on PVS for certain situations like that.
Okay, I see. Okay, so we are left with the last question.
Okay.
So question number 3, do you prefer a scanner with wire or wireless? Can you tell us the pros and cons that you have felt in your real daily practice?
Yeah, so I have both, but I'm only using the wireless now. At first, I would say the wired was faster and smoother and stuff like that. No longer the case. I don't notice if it is faster or smoother, it's not to the point that I notice it. And I'm not even trying to compare it because I no longer feel like I'm waiting for the scanner to connect or get signal and stuff like that. So I always use the wireless now. I think there's some huge benefits to that for me because I have my computer at 12 o'clock. The wire has to come over my shoulder or the patient. So it's just ergonomically better and more comfortable for me. I never have to fight the cord. I would say the only thing that you need to balance between wireless and wired is battery life, but we have 3 batteries, so I don't need to worry about that. We have the backup connection where you can make it into wired if you want to. So I think if it were me, I would get a wireless as my only scanner. And if I needed to use it in a wired way, you always could do that. The other thing, so battery's not really a big not a big issue to me because I have three of them. It usually lasts at least a whole big case, if not multiple cases. And then the smoothness and efficiency and everything is now, and I'm thinking I would say for the past year, it's been good enough or excellent to the point where even my staff is like, no, now it's great. But there was a period of time where I felt like the convenience of the wireless was offset because the wired was faster and smoother. So,
Mm.
given everything, I think wireless is the way to go. And you can even have it set up to easily connect between computers in different rooms if you get different hubs
Mm.
and connected, and it gives you that type of mobility. And so, I think that's what I would go with. I don't really see any major con to the wireless today in the form that it is now.
So most inconvenience that you feel from wire is the cord.
Pretty
That's like,
much the cord. I mean, what else could you say? I mean, it's fast. The cord itself. So of all the cords I've ever dealt with, the Medit cord is the best. Why? Because it doesn't have that power brick. It's just the USB-C connection. So
mm,
it doesn't get any better than that. So if you had to pick a corded scanner, I think more scanners have gone that direction. But I remember dreaming like one day scanners are going to be using just a USB-C or USB connection, and Medit did it first, as far as I know. So I think in terms of the wire, it's not that annoying. But what else could you say about it? I mean, it's fast. I mean, when you direct connect, you're always going to get the smoothest everything. But when the
mm,
wireless is as smooth as it is, it's not big difference where I'm like, oh, I need that extra 1 second of time to recover. So I think that basically it just comes down to the wire.
okay, I see. Okay, thank you for answering all the questions that I prepared today.
Perfect. Thank you.
So that's all about it for today. You'll be able to watch this webinar on our YouTube channel and Medit Academy once it's completed. Thank you for being here, Doctor.
Thank you. Have a great day.
See you in the next webinar. Bye.
Bye bye. See you later.